Okay, hello everybody. We're going to be talking for a little bit about an easy approach to continuous testing in DevOps. Um, Easy approach is basically a relative term. We'll call this an easier way. I won't be giving you step-by-step instructions on how to do this because my reality is different from yours when it comes to our projects. But let's see how we can make this process easier. Um, and as usual, before I forget, let's talk about who I am. My name is Anastasios Daskalopoulos. It's pronounced like it's spelled. I've been doing software testing and quality assurance since 2003. Things have changed a lot since then, and we'll talk about the changes that have been made and the changes that are continually going on. I've been doing test automation since 2007. Again, test automation is a completely different world now than what it used to be back then, when test automation was basically just getting started. And there were just a few number of tools, basically dominated by just a few companies. But we'll talk about how things have changed in one way, but how the situation's really stayed the same in quality assurance and testing. And please get in touch with me either at the Gmail account or through LinkedIn. I'd love to talk about your experiences, what you have to go through, your challenges, and how it compares to what we're going to talk about, and how we can just work out some kind of way for everybody to move through this. So we can talk about how we can basically develop better tests, better test automation in whatever framework we want. Okay, now so I would like to turn this presentation into a conversation. Think of it as a conversation. So please ask whatever kind of questions you have. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the changing face of quality assurance. Like I said, let's talk about an easier approach, if not necessarily an easy approach. This approach can be used even if your organization is not actually a DevOps organization. Um, we'll talk about how what things like DevOps really mean, because it can be a very malleable term. As I'm sure if you talk to other people, other companies, other QA people, DevOps can basically have numerous definitions. Um, but the ultimate goal is to test thoroughly, as soon as possible, as quickly as possible, after development, after deployment, and even during build if your tests are that steady. But what we want to do mostly is to just test thoroughly, create many tests that concentrate on validation and verification. Two words that kind of go way back in the software testing world, but haven't changed their meaning, haven't changed their importance at all. But let's ask first. I think people kind of get away from this idea when it comes to testing, really development, really anything in business. Is like, what are we trying to do? That should be the first question that we ask ourselves. What are we trying to do in testing at all levels of testing? We can ask, like, what is the point in test automation? That often varies from company to project to even individual tester of like, what are you trying to do? What is the point of all this? Um, we need to ask something like Dr. Feldman stressed, how fast is a test automation creation process? One thing that this approach tries to do is get people to create faster tests, not necessarily many tests all the time, but speed up the test process, the test creation process, the test execution process, so we can really get down to finding issues and talking about the reliability of the system. Let's talk about budget. How much is this? Who creates the tests? Who should create the tests? Some companies insist that their developers are the best at creating the test because they created the app, they created the feature, they worked on it, therefore they're the closest at it. Many people like me would say it's that closeness that actually removes them from that objectivity that's needed to really do good testing. And when do we test? When does the QA process begin? Before, during, after development? When? Let's talk about all these things. Let's talk about how things changed. Again, I'm not some kind of oracle about this. I don't know for certain, but this is what I have observed. When I first started testing in 2003, there were basically 40 people in one big room that all basically did the same thing and did certain facets of the same thing. And back then, QA was really at the bottom, many regarded at the bottom of the software development hierarchy. Basically, the developers were, like the talented people, and us testers were kind of just doing work that was kind of beneath development. But that's changed now, in my experience. And there have been changes in specialization, testers versus developers. If versus is too strong of a word, let's use something else. But I honestly think testers and QA should now have developing skills. It's a world now where, in order to really advance, you have to show that you can do some developing. The language aside, you should be able to develop and at least know how developing works. And you should be able to write your own simple apps, your own simple features to get you really good at knowing what developers have to go through. Same thing with the developers. Developers should be able to write good tests and not just pass their features. That is one criticism that I have had about developers writing test automation, because they basically just want to make sure that their features pass, that their tests pass. But testing isn't all about passing. Testing is about finding issues and really being honest about the software reliability. And there are different roles now. Back when I started this role, the software developer in test, the software engineer in test, depends on the company's definition. It's a good role that I think we should all grow into. We should all take advantage of. But what is it? Is it a developer who tests or a tester who develops? I think we heard correctly that software, like software testing, test automation, is a software development project, and we should approach it as that. In my opinion, this should be a tester role because it's a great opportunity to show our coding skill as well as use our test writing skills. So we can combine that. We can take great advantage of that. And as I've said, in companies that I've worked at, that I've observed, I think quality assurance has gotten a higher level of respect. It's gotten a higher status because of DevOps. In DevOps projects, now builds won't fail unless there are tests run, and the build will not fail unless tests pass. So we, in the quality assurance part, we saw how Dr. Feldman split up the illustration of DevOps, the infinity symbol, where we analyze. We do have that higher level status because we can show that we need good tests. There have to be tests and they have to pass. And in some companies where the developers write tests, there is like a quality assurance position, sometimes called a quality engineer, who actually reviews the developers' tests and basically orders them to write better tests or show how to write better tests. So the status has raised, but it depends on what we do. And again, this is what I've observed, experienced. There's greater communication now between developers and testers. Back when I started, I actually started testing in a town outside of Helsinki, Finland, at Nokia, and we were running our tests outside of Helsinki, Finland, but the developers were actually in San Diego. So this wasn't just a case of over the wall testing. This was over the ocean testing. And, never did we actually speak to the developers, never saw them. That we ran our tests, their tests were sent, our test results were sent to them, our bugs were sent to them in San Diego. And they're also faster and narrower development times between development and QA. Like I said, the testing phases used to be many weeks, if not months long. This was just months just for testing. And this was for testing like phone devices and the software for mobile phones. And same thing with development. We sometimes would wait weeks for a build that was testable. So things have gotten a lot faster. And I don't think there are very many companies that actually have that approach these days. And they have a different approach, what we call Agile. There's a greater reliance on Agile. Back when, of course, when I was at Nokia, there was literally a Nokia waterfall technique with different milestones and different activities during each milestone. Now we're in an agile world, but here's the interesting that I've noticed about numerous companies who practice agile. Teams develop however they want and call it agile. People basically teams do whatever they want, however they want, and it's all agile. And my question is agile such a flexible term? And I urge everyone to look at the Agile Manifesto, the principles of the Agile Manifesto, and just read about what the Agile Manifesto is supposed to be by the people who set up the whole idea to begin with. Like I said, it's a sequence of principles, like I think just 12 principles that we should all be familiar with. Other changes. Quality assurance, like testers. I'm going to use this term interchangeably. Quality assurance, software testing, QA people, testers. I'm going to use that interchangeably in this presentation. As we say, although it's not numerous as in years past, I'd love to know if there is really a company out there that does have a room full of 40 or 50 manual testers. But it seems like testing is not as numerous just in terms of numbers as it used to be. But it seems like we have a higher status than ever and an involvement with development, and with not just development, but with the systems engineers, with the project management, with the client. Because I've been lucky to be in companies where I do talk to the client to find out client needs. In the past, I had no business talking to the client. And now, like I said, because of DevOps, QA is no longer at the whim of project managers because of DevOps policies, DevOps-wide policies. But let's ask ourselves, what is DevOps? Let's see if we can get a definition for this and to see how DevOps changes in different organizations. But to try and break down the whole idea of DevOps, this is basically the simplest, easiest definition that I found. Its development proceeds in defined stages, but there's a breakdown in previously siloed activities. And these stages, depending on the definition, who wrote the DevOps books that your company is using, we can divide DevOps into these 6 areas, these 6 stages: planning, development, build, testing, deployment, and monitoring. You can call it operations/systems/monitoring. And it looks something like this. We saw something very similar to this, like I said, with Dr. Fellman's presentation. The arrows might be going in different direction, but we can see that it's a continuum. We don't have the waterfall-ish, milestones. Everything's constantly being developed and tested and released and monitored. And we keep building on that. And like Dr. Feldman said, we have to keep testing. Testing should be continuous. That's why we have at the very bottom test, where it says test on one side, and at the very bottom on the other side, in the op side, it says monitor. That's what we do. We monitor when we test, and everything's building on that same continuum. This is the simplest way, the easiest way. Probably everyone will agree that this is the case. Some of these terms, some of these stages might be different, but basically we have this continuum of continuous integration, continuous development, continuous testing, continuous monitoring, and everything repeats infinitely. But despite all that, despite all these changes, I've seen the purpose of QA has always been the same. What we do is we eliminate or at least greatly reduce the number of bugs in the production environment, or before we get to the production environment. We can also use that term bugs. You know, in one company I work with, we literally weren't even allowed to use the word bug. You know, we always found issues. But let's say we reduce the number of issues. We reduce the number of things that lessen end user confidence in the system. What else do? We account for the risks that may be present in the release software. We should know when something's released, you know, what can be the problem, what risks should we be ready for. Adam talked about that yesterday. And we also have to be in charge and organize our test creation and execution. I honestly think this needs to be the case. QA needs to be in charge of quality assurance. There can be, business owners, of course, who have the final say if something looks good or not. But we need to be in charge of the actual testing, the actual quality assurance processes. To avoid what I've come to call the yes, this looks good testing philosophy. We can see that we've come into software testing through different fields, some through insurance and data collection. I've come into software testing basically through airplanes. And so there is a lot of quality assurance, as we should hope there will be in airplanes and aviation. And when the ground crew is doing the checks, there's a definite list of what to check and what the results are. And you should probably be very happy that the ground crews on your airlines don't just look at any part of the system like the ailerons and just kind of look at it for a few minutes, go, yeah, this looks good. No, we definitely write out what we're checking, what we're looking at, and what the results are. And we communicate those results. Everybody has to know what the issues are, if there are any bugs, where are the bugs. We all have to know, the entire project has to know what the system quality is. And yes, we should be the bearer of bad news when necessary. In my experience at companies that I've worked at, project manager is often asked, like with the test results, was the testing process positive? Did we have good test results? My answer was always yes, we have good test results because we found a lot of bugs. And that's often been the opposite of what the project manager or the development managers want to hear. So to us, finding bugs is good. That's what we want. That's what everybody should want. We can call that bad news, or to me, that's always been good news. We'll talk about this in terms of test automation. Very quickly, get rid of the objections to quality assurance, because I think our approach will kind of get rid of these objections. QA takes too long. QA becomes the bottleneck. To me, like long development is the bottleneck, and QA isn't the development. We can't be the bottleneck. Budget. Many project managers just say, "Oh, we just don't have the money for it." Other developers have told me bugs escape anyway, so why even bother with it? I've actually heard this. And other developers just have the objection that they just don't want to do it. That's the only way I can describe it. They just don't think it's necessary because they have the philosophy: if end users complain or find a problem, we'll fix it. We'll get to that. We'll get to that rebuttal, but going from the top from the last slide, with continuous integration and testing, QA is done in parallel to development. There's always something done to be with testing. We've heard this in the past two presentations. We can always be testing. Testing can start at the very beginning, at the very beginning of at the very initial documentation stage. Budget, because of this, there doesn't have to be always a big separate QA budget. Fixing bugs in the early stages of documentation, development, testing, all those areas is cheaper than the expensive 30-day post-release bug fix period. Now we've all seen, I'm sure, graphs similar to this. The cost of fixing defects. Look at the cost involved in design, implementation, testing, and then look at maintenance. It's much more expensive, and it just looks a lot worse for the company. It's just bad for the company to just wait for post-release to really fix, to have the bug fix time. Why do project managers do that? I got a secret from that, from a project manager who says that QA rounds come from the project's budget, but post-release fixes are charged to the company, which can be categorized as waste. So the mentality was, as a project manager, it's better for me for the company to lose money in waste than for me to go over budget in my own project. But we can get rid of that mentality through this approach. Also, bugs escaping anyway. We can look at risk-based testing to try and mitigate that. What we really want to do is, yes, we can't find everything, but we can find the showstopper, serious, even medium severity issues that really need to be found and fixed. So the critical areas in the feature can be used by the end users and by the business owners, by everybody with confidence. But it's inevitable that bugs are released, but let's try to make them as minor severity as possible and quickly fixed. But we have to be careful about what they call defect immunity, because allowing low severity defects makes possible the release of continually greater severity defects until catastrophe strikes. The big example of this is with the space shuttle, because space shuttles were launched with what were deemed low severity defects that just weren't worth fixing because that would put the launch schedule behind. But the problem with that is if you allow little bugs through, you allow more and more little bugs, and they actually get bigger in severity until the big catastrophe strikes. So everything is worth fixing. All issues are worth finding and fixing. And very quickly, other objections that I just don't want to do it. Like, I have had software developers who find bugs as like a personal affront. It's like, how dare you find bugs in my code? And the objection that I've recently dealt with is, if end users complain, we'll fix it. Again, look at the costs. We're wasting company money in just knowing that, if the users complain, we'll fix it. And buggy software loses customers because the bug in the software, the bug in the website, the bug anywhere is a blow to the company's credibility. And like I said, just search for news about Cyberpunk 2077 to see the financial cost of buggy software. The company literally lost tens of millions of dollars in buggy software. So everything's worth fixing. And often we have to avoid the failing QA self-fulfilling prophecy because we don't have time for good testing. There's no documentation. There's no direction. There's no definition. Literally, I've been in projects, I've been in companies where I've had to test websites. I've been given 2 hours and I'm simply told, look for something that's broken. That's the only thing. Look for something that's broken. You have 2 hours. Of course, that's not going to lead to good results in terms of QA and testing. And, we're left with the fact that, well, bugs got out anyway. So let's make, this is often what happens when development is in charge of testing. Let's put ourselves in charge of testing. Along with that, QA has to be independent and in charge of QA. At least now, be in a project where quality assurance is not just the last and least important task. We do have our own ways of thinking and our own processes. And also, we also have certification. It also surprises me how few people know that there actually is software testing certification. There is quality assurance certification. It often surprises a lot of developers and project managers. To them, software testing certification is almost like being certified in vacuum cleaning or something. But we do have our own processes. We do have our certification, which is in our own standards and ways of working. But let's find out, where do we start? We've seen in the previous two, and they're actually the previous three presentations, especially in the last one, that yes, test automation is very important. We'll be getting to that in a few slides. But where do we start? I've been in projects where QA people immediately begin automating. And that often ends up basically just automating buggy software, because we haven't found and fixed the bugs. We haven't identified what the issues could be and what we should look for. So the ultimate goal, right off, like starting with the documentation phase, the ultimate goal is to quantify software reliability. How do we do that? By finding and fixing bugs, and reporting stable areas through repeated tests, with different input and expected outputs. And using test automation can help us run tests with a lot of different kinds of inputs, and they can match and assert the expected outputs. Well, let's start with a plan. We have to plan. We can't just test it. We have to find out what we're doing. Many developers, and I've seen testers do this too, simply say they tested a system and it's fine, without saying what they did exactly, what the results were. To quantify, we have to actually write down what we do. So let's start with a plan. This doesn't have to be anything bigger, anything major. I hope the days of like the kind of test plan I had to write for Nokia.com, where basically the first step was I had to write like a 20 to 25 page test plan, which basically was, spread around, was accepted, and then went into a doc lib and no one ever saw it again. The test plan should be a living document. People should be using it. Not just testers, but developers, project management should be familiar with it. The business owners should know what we're doing too. And it's just a plan of what you're going to do and why you're doing it. And we shouldn't start testing or automating without any plan or purpose. I found this, if you search for just one-page test plan, you might find a result like this. This is for a release, for a sprint. And all you have is just one page. What are we testing? What are we doing? What are the schedules? What are the risks? And how are we doing this? I think you can put that all into one page. And also the old testing realities. This was a big thing. If any of us, I hope a lot of us still have test certification. We always talked about verification and validation. Validation is, are we building the right system? Is this what the client wants? And yes, I have been in projects where basically what we have works, but it's not what the client really wanted. And also we verify, does the system work right? We always test in terms of validation and verification. Is the client happy with this and does it work? But starting off, the last thing we'll do about manual testing, if some people object to the term manual testing, I prefer to say exploratory testing because you can do this either before, like during the documentation stage. You can also use this exploratory testing charter. It was just a piece of paper. It can even be just a notepad, just a dot text file. Where, what do we do? It's just exploratory testing, but you plan it out. You can do these five steps. What are you doing? Like, what is a specific feature area? What are you trying to do? What are the specific expected results? What do we want? Let's record the steps and let's let everybody know what the results were. So we avoid the, yeah, this looks fine type of results reporting. So you can do this, like I said, before or during. You can use this to find information for your test automation. One more thing, plan and document what you did with the charter. Publish your results like wherever you work with, in the Slack, in a wiki, in Confluence. But understand the application. This exploratory testing isn't necessarily for just finding bugs. It's for learning. It's for learning the application. Like I heard a long time ago, and I think this applies, QA needs to know the system better than anyone. We can look for specific bugs, issues. I think a good tester, a good test manager, a good QA manager is good at finding bugs. And also pay attention. That's probably the best advice. Keep in mind in attention blindness, the fresh eyes system works because often bugs escape because we see what we think we should be seeing. But let's finally get to test automation. I think the DevOps approach is all just about test automation. It's about continuous testing, and it's just test automation. Think of it as faster and more thorough test automation. In other words, this isn't something else we need to learn. We're already doing this, but let's try and find ways to use our test automation faster. Like I said, continuous testing is about test automation. We don't have to learn anything different. The thing I have to say though, poor test automation won't give good results. Just like there's good test automation, there's bad test automation. Test automation by itself is not a panacea. Test automation won't solve anyone's problems. Like we heard already this morning, good exploratory testing and good test automation go together. And that is absolutely true. We have to combine these things. You explore, you learn, you automate. It's all part of one continuum. And like I said, too many projects simply just automate without any plan, purpose, or goal. We have to find out our plan and what our purpose is in doing this. And we all ask these questions: what are we trying to do? And use the above precepts that we saw for exploratory testing in test automation. Let's organize our tests. Tests should be about specific areas, and let's label and title the test, tag them, so it should be obvious what the tests do. You shouldn't just throw a bunch of JUnit, for example, at people and say, here's the test. And we also have to avoid just making like one big 400 or 500 line all-inclusive end-to-end test, which always ends up failing. For our purposes, continuous testing is test automation. Poor test automation will not give good results. Like, I have to agree. In my experience, I've been in too many projects where I've seen all red. Yes, that's me. I've seen test automation, not that I've been doing, I want to make clear, but in competing subcontractors, They insist on doing the test automation process. Their regression tests are all red, and they just like you said, they just ignore them. We have to combine good exploratory testing with good test automation, and we can't just automate, like we say again. So let's organize our tests. We'll be seeing how to do that. And avoid tests that simply check off tasks. In DevOps, we at the developers, at the tests that I've had to review, I've actually had to see tests that basically just said, yes, the status is 200. I found this text and I found this button, the test passed. That's not testing. We actually have to test like people do. Test automation that gives poor testing won't give good results. It's not test automation that gives good or bad results, but good testers. And we can't blame test automation for buggy software. Going on with this, test automation is testing software in the same way a human tester would. Yes, people are the best testers, and we can create tests that test like a good software tester does. I honestly believe this. I create my tests this way. If a person can run the test case, then test automation can do it. But let's create good tests instead of just saying, let's let test automation do this. The value of test automation is proportional to the skill and motivation of the test automation engineer. A good tester will find a lot of defects, a lot of bugs. Sometimes, I shouldn't say defects because, I worked in companies that didn't allow that. The legal department didn't allow us to say defects. A good tester will find bugs. A good test automation engineer will also find bugs. And what's defined a skilled and motivated test automation engineer can find issues and generate reports better than someone who simply just has it as a task. Too many DevOps operations just have testing as just a task to just write off and that's it. Let's use that for actual testing. And as we saw earlier, I found the statistic, anywhere from just 10 to 33%, anywhere from 1/10 to 1/3 of issues are found with test automation. That's a reality of test automation. We're not going to find a lot of our issues with just test automation. Pick your favorite statistic, but the harsh reality is that test automation will not find a majority of your bugs. You have to have a lot of fresh eyes. You have to have good exploratory testing. You have to have good documentation. And we do that, with having everybody involved in the project with bug/issue finding. Quality is about the whole project. It's not just about us. It's about the whole project. So let's make sure you're finding bugs and not the end users.
So I'm so sorry, everybody, but in order to make sure that we keep on schedule, because some of our other speakers have to meet their schedule, we've got to move on to the next speaker. However, this was fantastic. And I highly recommend folks get in touch with Anastasios on LinkedIn to get more information and to ask questions, since we didn't have time for Q&A. Thank you so much for joining us today. And hopefully we'll connect again soon.